There are no longer straight to DVD B movies. Instead, it is now straight to streaming B movies. Jason Statham is probably like the king and lead of the action genre for these kinds of movies. And then there's a variety of other well-known actors that can put a more, lighthearted version out there, or even just the occasional actual comedy. Well, Vince Vaughn has had a recent release that falls into that kind of film. It is an action comedy with a time travel twist. While I will probably forget about it in a couple of months, I did in fact enjoy the wild ride that is Mike and Nick and Alice. So I didn't really want to just go and give away the time travel twist thing, but the movie does start out with the time travel stuff immediately. And then kind of just immediately goes and can't use that anymore, and then just goes into like the fun action and some actual character work that does have like a little depth to it. If you have seen the trailer for this movie, though, I think it gives a little too much away. I think you saw quite a bit of the story and some of the twists, and actually, I think the whole thing probably should have just been named something different. But let's just go ahead and do a quick plot rundown and try to be pretty vague with spoils and everything overall for just this whole video, because hey, I do think you should go see the movie. All right. This movie is about a mobster named Nick that time travels to the past to stop his good friend Mike from being killed the night of a party for the mob boss's son having been released from prison. Nick's wife Alice gets involved, and the whole plan escalates from just needing Mike to be alive from one guy to having to take down like the entire crime family organization. And there are plenty of other side stories, character pieces, information blown around, bombshells, twists, all that stuff kind of being thrown around. It doesn't really focus that hard on the time travel stuff or give that whole thing that much complexity. It is used at the beginning to get future Nick to the right night. And then for slightly comedic and I think reasonable reasons, it can't be used again. And then the only real rules for time travel and the time stream curriculum and all this shit is that if past Nick dies, then future Nick dies as well. And they also do some kind of thing where like future Nick's phone doesn't work because two of the same phone can't exist together in the same reality. So his future Nick's phone is like bricked. But then future Nick does use a phone later in the movie. So I guess presumably that wasn't his and they had like gotten one off screen as a headcanon, which for me isn't really that big of a deal. That's easy to explain. He just got it off screen and he has a new phone. But at that moment of the other time, he hadn't picked up a phone yet, and so Mike had to use one because his phone could be break. And it is a nitpick for sure. And this movie, you can absolutely nitpick. And there are definitely some logical things that are broken for the sake of the comedy, like a funny shot or for a line. And the time travel can be broken with just a little thought about it and how it could work. But again, this whole movie isn't actually about the time travel. There are some like themes and messaging about how even with a time travel version of yourself coming in and explaining some situations, there are still some events and trauma you have to experience yourself. A level of trauma that can't just be told that you have experienced and then that changes your outlook on life or brings you to a certain mentality. No, it's something that you have to experience yourself, even if yourself is the one explaining it to you. Like it does touch on that kind of thing and some other decent stuff. I mean, it really is still mostly surface level because it's a comedy, but hey, there's stuff there and it's ideas you don't really see that much in this time travel everything. It's decently good and new and kind of original. And Vince Vaughn, of course, does carry this movie. Although I did like the head mob guy's son named Jimmy Boy, played by Jimmy Tatro. He nailed stupid. I think being a stupid character can be really hard to do. It can be cringe and dumb and just get old quickly. I think he genuinely did a really good dumb guy, because there was things that of course he wasn't stupid about, or he'd just be like, yeah, I don't know what that means, it's not a big deal, and it's like, okay, yeah, I guess it isn't really a big deal. Or stuff that is just kind of confusing and distracting, be like, what the fuck, like he did it really really well. And there's James Marsden, who's just kind of forgettable main character energy man, that James Marsden just does now, and I guess is known for these days. I'm sorry to say this name and butcher it this much for such a lovely lady, but Aiza Gonzalez, if that's how you say it, was fine. She was nice to look at and had a decent amount of heart brought into the movie. Nothing to complain about, but nothing really stone off, and she wasn't a big comedic character. Keith David in this movie plays the mob boss, and he was kind of wasted, but it's still nice to see. And there were other people in this movie that had like 10 seconds of screen time that were pretty famous names, or pretty decent comedic actors who worked with Vince Vaughn before, and they really just weren't utilized that much. And it's just boom, boom, boom. Some fast-paced other stuff because they really kind of wanted to focus on, Nick, Mike, and Alice. Like honestly, the comedy and the humor wasn't the best I've seen in the recent years. It was still very, Vince Vaughn humor. Funny dialogue he spouts out quickly, and him just kind of doing his kind of thing and talking his way through stuff. Some physical, but not really over the top. But I think it didn't hit as hard as the normal Vince Vaughn stuff. Partly just probably not as well written, but also he didn't quite have the support from the rest of the cast to boost that comedy. And the pacing again was a bit rushed. Like Vince Vaughn has always been best, in my opinion, when he has other great comedic actors surrounding him, and they all kind of feeding off of each other. And that didn't quite happen with this movie. The action, actually, though, I think was even more entertaining than the comedy. Vince Vaughn is definitely getting up there in age, and so he isn't moving as well as you would think or hope. But still, the action was creative and entertaining, and occasionally taking the piss out of like action movies, like how dangerous it is to jump out of a glass window. But it also sometimes was pretty serious and not just comedy, doing some real John Wick shit. And you genuinely did feel something for both Vince Vaughn's characters. The movies would go down paths, you're pretty familiar with. You're thinking they're going down option A because it's the safe, predictable route that you've seen a lot of times. And there's no real stakes you can feel because, it's a silly comedy movie. But then, boom, actually, it did option B or even C, and you go, oh shit. Maybe the characters aren't safe. Option B and C is stuff you've seen before, and you kind of go, oh, yeah, I guess you could have done that. And in that moment, you're kind of like, wait a minute. Maybe I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe these characters aren't safe. But then it might pull back to A and go, see, we could have done something serious. But don't worry, we are still just the silly, safe comedy action movie. Or are we? In the end, it was a decent ride, and I had fun with it, and I was kind of trying to guess which trope they would maybe do or next, or just where it was going in general, and I had some decent surprises, and really ended up finding myself, oh damn, that was an interesting choice, and kind of smiling. Like the first 2/3 of the movie was pretty well thought out. I don't mean in terms of like the whole movie. I mean in terms of like future Nick's plan and how he was going to save Mike and everything. Because up to that point, he pretty much knew how the night was supposed to go. It's what he had lived before. But then they started going down, a different future, a different path that future Mike didn't really know about, the stakes kind of grew, and then everything had to be a little more improvised. It was nice. And I like seeing Vince Vaughn fighting with himself as both enemies and partners and doing shit and saving each other. It was fun. And you know what? Actually, I think this movie did something a lot of modern movies kind of have trouble with. Like, it actually handled the existence of cell phones very well. They were used how you would think in very clever ways, and you weren't just sitting there going, they just called the cops or a different guy or talked to somebody on their fucking phone. None of this would have happened. No, like there was general reasons why they couldn't, wouldn't, and then they still didn't forget that they had phones so they could, fucking text and call and plan with each other without having to be in the same room. Like honestly, this is the kind of movie that will go out in theaters on a slow month and then make its money back with DVD sales and licensing out and getting some ad money from Comedy Central, who would play it like 5 times a month. And it would eventually get appreciated because, it would always happen to be on right when there seems to be nothing else on 200 channels to watch. And you would just kind of turn your brain off and enjoy some Vince Vaughn fast talking casual humor. Maybe mention that you had seen it, and after you watch enough times, you're going, actually, I kind of really like this movie. So, you know what? It would be a shame if this movie was just buried under the mountain of streaming shit. It is not highbrow or a timely classic or even gut busting funny. I think the most that I really ever did was chuckle and smile. But still, it was just a fun, simple little movie with a fun premise and couple good jokes and action scenes. I like that we still get these kinds of things, and I think Vince Vaughn nailed it with his comments about late night shows lately. And I think that this is a man that should be listened to more in general about the business side of Hollywood and kind of what comedy movies are or should still be. And I still think he makes some pretty watchable things, more than most other actors right now. And so I'm happy to support his work. So yeah, if you want, it might be a bit too long, but it is just a fun little movie to put on to make you smile before getting on with your day. So if that sounds any sort of appealing to you, then check out Mike and Nick and Alice. Yeah, that is still a dumb name.